Next up is Peter Merholz, who I've known for 5-6 years, and I've learned that once you get past the very provocative exterior, you learn that he deeply cares for people and holds a lot of contempt for organizations that do not care for people. So Peter's begun to tap into the need for businesses to become more human, not simply because it's a good thing to do, but because it's good business and it's increasingly going to be something that's just plain required. So Peter, please share with us what you're thinking.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I augmented the title a little bit, made it a little more relevant to our sessions here today. As Brandon said, one of my missions over the last couple of years has been thinking about how to embed humanity into businesses, and this talk is going to have some reflections, actually a little bit on what John Hagel spoke about yesterday. Similar to John, I don't propose to, this isn't a completed thesis. This is more kind of a probe, a search. I actually end with questions. This is something I think that hasn't been figured out yet, but it's kind of a trend spotting of what things I've seen in terms of businesses that are delivering great experiences. What are some interesting things that they're doing around being human? I think it's helpful to begin, though, with some what I call oversimplified history. So if we go back a couple hundred years into the industrial age, into the factories and mass distribution, in order to make this work, in order to make these types of businesses work, we saw the emergence of org charts, organization charts. And organization charts and this whole kind of way of behaving is something that we are still subject to today, even though it was born of a very different mindset. And it was this period in the industrial age was where we really started seeing kind of how businesses were stripping away our humanity. We no longer were individuals trying to do stuff. We were now cogs in this big machine, literally and figuratively. We were placed in boxes in these org charts, given labels, i.e. job titles, that were made interchangeable so that anybody with that job title could be swapped out for anybody else. And so much of what matters to us as people, as humans, was squashed out of us. With the coming of the information age, there was talk that we were getting past the industrial age, but with the coming of the information age, what actually has happened is that it's gotten worse to a certain extent, because now we just sit in cubes staring at computers all day long. We really have been reduced to some very, very few elements of what makes us people, is what's expected of us in our organizations. And that's not good. That is not going to carry us forward. And so as we look at kind of what are those characteristics of the industrial and information age, these are the types of things that were the characteristics of those periods. Focus on products, focus on manufacturing, ownership, stocks, and this is borrowing from Hegel yesterday, acquisition, efficiency, being analytical. You had organizations that were siloed, that were very hierarchical. It tended to root a lot in the individual, and people often worked in isolation. And yesterday afternoon, Cindy spoke a little bit about the network and kind of how her and her company's orientation around the network is requiring a shift. I tend to think of it less as the networked age than what we're entering into as this connected age. And I like connected instead of network because network is still the plumbing. Network is a means to an end. Connection is that end. And what do I mean? So what are the characteristics of a connected age, which is, I think, the age that we are in or kind of emerging into? A shift from products to services, a shift from manufacturing to focusing on experiences, a shift away from ownership towards access. As Hegel was talking about, from stocks to flows. focus less on efficiency and more on effectiveness. Less about being analytical and more about being generative and creative. Trying to do away with these silos and move into something that is more cross-functional. Less about hierarchies and more about kind of hyperlinking, connected where it matters. Working less in these individual contexts and more in these social contexts. And with all of that, operating a whole lot less in isolation. And the thing that's probably most important in the connected age is relationships, and the relationships we have with one another within our business and with our customers. So we're seeing the shift from this kind of industrial information age orientation towards this connected age orientation. And as part of that shift, I think one of the keys is, when I talked about relationships, is changing the relationships between management and the lack of trust that they are able to develop either in their customers or in their employees. What are relationships based on, if relationships are so key? Well, I'm going to back up a little bit. This is a couple of cartoons about the airline industry. And as we know, the airline industry is not necessarily a place where you're going to find a lot of great customer experiences. Can I get an upgrade? Sure, I'll treat you with difference instead of contempt. Or the cattle saying, I'm tired of them treating us like airline passengers, right? So this is not an industry that is known necessarily for great experiences, though that's been changing. There's a Forrester every year puts out a customer experience index. And I've called out the airlines within these 100 and some firms, 130 or so firms. And you can see the airline that is ranked the highest is Southwest Airlines, which is also, of course, considered kind of the low-cost, no-frill airlines. But they provide what is considered the best customer experience compared to your JetBlues, Continentals, Delta United, Northwest, US Air. Now, why is that? Well, I think a key part of that comes from this quote from their founder, Herb Kelleher, about a former president, she's since retired, Colleen Barrett. But what Colleen did was she brought this humanistic culture into Southwest Airlines. She gave the people on the front line a lot of flexibility, recognizing that the folks back at headquarters couldn't anticipate every situation. And so as long as those people on the front line were, as it says, leaning toward the customer, they knew that they were doing okay. Now, this is a huge demonstration of trust in their employees, in their frontline employees, which in many organizations are among the least empowered people, right? Typically, frontline employees have policies and procedures manuals that they have to abide by, but what you're seeing here is that this is a company that was willing to kind of take a risk to empower their employees to do what is right in the moment. It's similar to Nordstrom, which is famous for their customer experience and their customer service. This was the Nordstrom employee handbook. It was comprised of one rule: use best judgment in all situations. There will be no additional rules, right? So, and this is something that some high-end retailers, high-end hotels and hospitality have recognized. Empower those people on the front line to do what is best in the moment. But again, that requires having trust in your team, which so few organizations do. Another example that I thought was quite interesting, there's this really fascinating PowerPoint presentation that you can find on SlideShare from Netflix. Their CEO, Reed Hastings, he has a deck just simply called Culture. And it's hundreds of slides long, but I'm pulling out one slide here around the Netflix vacation policy and tracking. There is no policy or tracking. And then this quote, there is also no clothing policy at Netflix, but no one has come to work naked lately. And the lesson being, you don't need detailed policies for everything. And if you read this culture deck, there's actually a lot of these, a lot of other kind of evidences of Netflix putting a lot of trust in their employees to do the right thing and not need to be told how to do it. What Netflix has identified is that you need to kind of provide a vision, a set of values, and some goals, and with that, let the people, empower the people to figure out how to get there. And I don't think it's any surprise that an organization that places that much trust in its employees, those employees turn around and deliver extremely high customer satisfaction. This is a survey, 4C Results Top 100 Retail Satisfaction Index for last year, and you can see Netflix is at the top and has been for years. Netflix consistently provides the best customer experience of any kind of online retail organization. And I would argue that a lot of that is because of the happy employees turn around wanting to make their customers happier. So, and then, the business benefit of such things. Obviously, Netflix has succeeded where their main competition has not, to the degree that a couple of weeks ago, Blockbuster essentially called it quits, put itself up for sale, and it's in the process of being acquired for pennies on the dollar of what it had been valued for. Now, it's one thing to be able to trust within your organization, and that's very important, and again, something that some companies, some savvy, wise companies do, but clearly not enough. But I had an epiphany doing a project last year with our friends at USAA. This is a few executives at USAA. They're a financial and insurance services firm. They mostly work with people in the military and their families. And we were doing a simple one-day workshop with them around a vision for USAA Digital, kind of where they could go with USAA Digital. And this is us doing work in the workshop. This is us talking about some ideas we have for the future of USAA Digital. And one of the things to know about USAA, if you don't already, is that they are considered pretty much the premier insurance services firm when it comes to customer service. Their rankings are through the roof. They're well known for their member service representatives, their call center people, kind of going way out of their way to help their military customers, members, in dire moments of need. They get calls from war zones on satellite phones with people, and they can hear the gunfire in the background, and these soldiers are asking for life insurance, and they will give that to them. Right? That is why they exist, is for moments like this. And so they have this set of values around delivering to their members that gives them this extremely high customer service ranking, the highest within insurance and the second highest of any business overall. Now, it's not, though, just a matter of doing kind of great by their customer. This is an image from a mobile check deposit. So USAA was the first financial services firm to provide mobile check deposit, where you simply take a picture of a check and it's deposited in that way. Now this, when they introduced it, is actually, you could kind of, it's fairly risky. It is, there are ways that your customers could take advantage of this in ways that would make you, as the financial services firm, uncomfortable, right? You don't have the finality of the artifact of the paper check at hand, but they were willing to do it because they knew it would provide for a better customer experience. And during this workshop with them, one of the things I ended up writing on the whiteboard as we were having this conversation is, what does it mean to trust your customers more than anyone else trusts their customers? Because that is what USAA is doing here. They are demonstrating trust in their customers. So often, organizations are worried about being trusted, particularly financial services organizations. But what USAA has recognized is that you can go even beyond that and in turn trust your customers. And when you do that, it opens up these interesting new opportunities, such as mobile check deposit, that are become real differentiators. Yes, other banks, Chase most notably, have followed suit. But for at least a year, USAA was pretty much the only financial services firm offering this service. And so what does it mean to put trust in your customers? What are those things that you can do that nobody else would be willing to do because they don't have trust in their customers? And it's also worth noting that USAA isn't doing this kind of because they're a charity. Or because simply for great customer service. USAA has no physical branches. Handling of paper checks is a cost that they would love to get rid of. And so by making everything digital, that actually saves them money. So they do have a benefit from it themselves, but they also recognize that the customers have a benefit in terms of ease, and you get this kind of happy, the win-win that we all want in business there in the upper right-hand corner. We always want to be in the upper right-hand corner. By placing trust in their customers, they were able to realize a win for themselves as well as their customers. So other businesses that are demonstrating this kind of trust. There's a lot of, many online businesses have had to do this because they don't have that ability to have this kind of person-to-person relationship. Craigslist is kind of a somewhat famous example. A lot of things going on Craigslist, and there has been some bad news of people taking advantage of Craigslist, but that is definitely overwhelmed by the positivity that people have experienced by using Craigslist and the trust that Craigslist has had to put in its users to behave as good citizens. Airbnb is another recent example of a service that requires a lot of trust in its various customers. Airbnb is this service that allows you to essentially rent out your room or an apartment for nights on end. It's like a vacation rental service, and so they bring together people with places to stay and people who are looking for places to stay. And as you can see from this chart, they've had an extremely accelerated growth. And then there's the couchsurfing.net, I think it is, or .org, which is this kind of funkier version of Airbnb. But again, these are all services that require trust in the people who are using them in order for them to work at all. And they're proving out. These things are proving out. The city of New York is actually thinking of ways to thwart Airbnb because the hotels that account for a lot of the revenue that the city of New York brings in are up in arms because people are staying through Airbnb and these types of services for a whole lot cheaper, and those taxes aren't going back to the city. This is becoming truly disruptive, and this disruption is based on the trust that you can have in the people who are using the system. For a little bit more, if you're interested in this idea, there's this whole kind of meme around collaborative consumption, and there's a book, What's Mine is Yours, The Rise of Collaborative Consumption, about kind of these types of tools, or about things like car share, Zipcar, that kind of thing, where it's people, instead of owning stuff, it's about providing access to things and sharing the resources that you have. Another example of placing extreme trust in your customers comes from one of our favorite companies, Zappos. Zappos starting as a shoe retailer. They now retail pretty much any kind of clothing apparel. But one of the challenges they faced very early on is that people, when they're buying shoes, they don't necessarily know if it's going to fit. There's hurdles that you have to overcome before people are willing to commit. So the thing that Zappos did was that they provided a 365-day return policy. You can return it for up to a year, and free shipping both ways. And so what people do, and you probably all are privy to this, you buy 3 or 4 pairs of shoes of different sizes and styles perhaps, and find the pair that you like and send the others back, right? Again, and this is the kind of offering that could be taken advantage of, but that Zappos decided, we have trust in our customers to do right by us, that they will honor kind of the opportunity that we're providing, and Zappos obviously realized the benefit of that trust through growth. Sales close to $1 billion, acquisition a couple of years ago, year and a half ago by Amazon. One of the best kind of brand, one of the highest kind of brand experience rankings around. So that willingness to place this trust in their customers has definitely benefited them. And then this is a kind of a little thing that so far, but as part of this sensing of what's going on in the landscape, I wanted to call out. You're probably all familiar with Panera Bread. They're a chain of bakeries. The CEO of Panera Bread stepped down a little while ago to start Panera Cares. And these are these cafes that are pay what you wish. So they look exactly like a Panera Bread store, except they don't have cash registers. They have suggested prices, and they have essentially a collection box. And they've now opened their third. They started one, they tried that for a few months, that seemed to work, another, that seemed to work, and now they've opened a third. They haven't yet proven out this model, but one of the things that they've identified, and you can see it a little bit lower down, about 20% of the visitors leave more than suggested, 20% leave less, and 60% pay about what is suggested. So it actually ends up working out pretty close to what it would be if it were filled with cash registers and kind of the normal operations. And again, this demonstration of trust in their customers to be honorable and to do the right thing. These are just a few examples, and I think the reason is we're very early on in this willingness for businesses to trust their customers, and I'd love to hear if there are other stories that folks either know from their own companies or what's out there. I'd love to gather more. But the reason I'm bringing this out here is I think this is kind of sensing the potential of a trend and an opportunity to realize some interesting new value by placing trust in your customers in this regard. So thinking about businesses being human, that willingness, humans, in order to have relationships, need to trust one another. There's more to being human than simply trust, though, and something else I've been thinking about, I'll now talk about. Switching gears, though, a little bit. Everything I ever needed to know about managing experiences, ... So I'm going to actually start with a video from the TED conference, just a clip of a video, and so I'll set it up. There's this thing called the Marshmallow Challenge. If you go to marshmallowchallenge.com, you can find out more about it. And the idea is to get a group of folks similar to you all around tables, kind of like you are at. You give people 20 sticks of spaghetti, 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, and 1 marshmallow. And the challenge is for a group to build the tallest structure with the marshmallow on top. And it's this kind of competition. It's this, kind of a team building kind of group exercise that goes on a lot. And some interesting results have emerged. And this is a talk that Tom Wujek gave at TED, I think a couple years ago. I've got a clip.
Who have a lot more uh-oh moments than others. And among the worst are recent graduates of business school. It's amazing. They lie, they cheat, they get distracted, and they produce really lame structures. And of course, there's teams that have a lot more ta-da structures. And among the best are recent graduates of kindergarten. And it's pretty amazing, as Peter tells us. Not only do they produce the tallest structures, but they're the most interesting structures of them all. So the question you want to ask is, how come? Why? What is it about them? And Peter likes to say that none of the kids spend any time trying to be CEO of Spaghetti Inc., right? They don't spend time jockeying for power. But there's another reason as well. And the reason is that business students are trained to find the single right plan. Right? And then they execute on it. And then what happens is when they put the marshmallow on top, they run out of time, and what happens? It's a crisis. Sound familiar, right? Okay. What kindergartners do differently is that they start with the marshmallow and they build prototypes, successive prototypes.
So I love this, and it ended up tying into something else I was thinking about. This idea of kindergartners and why they're able to succeed in these types of challenges where others aren't. And I would argue that part of the reason is that kindergartners are actually in touch with what makes them human in a way that perhaps business school graduates are not. And it resonates with this kind of the rise of design thinking. So for me, the elevation of design thinking in the discourse is interesting because it's an indicator of something else going on. Because I actually don't think the conversation about design thinking is about design. It's about frustrations with typical business practices and a recognition that we need to engage in new ways. And I think the power of design thinking isn't necessarily around design, but it's around embracing these characteristics of what makes us human. And thinking about it from this perspective of kindergarten is interesting, because if you look at, this is an image from one of our UX intensive workshops where people are in groups and they're doing these various exercises, and it's similar to the kind of thing that we do when we facilitate workshops within Adaptive Path with our clients. And if you look at these types of setups where design and design thinking is taking place, they closely resemble kindergarten classrooms. And I think that's meaningful, and while perhaps not intentional, it's revealing. There's something about the kindergarten classroom that taps into some very fundamental aspects of who we are as people, and I think it's worth that design thinking is trying to kind of re-engage as well. And I think it's worth calling out a few things. Expressing visually and tactily. Right, the industrial and information age, the analytical orientation got to be very, people not comfortable drawing, not comfortable expressing themselves. It's very words and numbers oriented, and it's not very generative. And I think what we're seeing with design thinking and what you see in kindergarten is this, this willingness and desire to express in many different ways. A recognition, with the possible exception of the teacher, that all contributors are equal, right? There isn't, as was explained earlier by Tom, kind of this jockeying for position. It's just, kids getting together and doing stuff, and there's no hierarchy, and you're just all in it together, and you're all solving these problems together. Now, something that I think is particularly important, this comes from a video stressing the value of play in kindergartens, because one of the things that's happening is kindergartens are starting to require their students to study in ways and learn, and the whole No Child Left Behind thing is going on. And one of the things that is so crucial, though, for kindergartners and how they engage is this kinesthetic engagement. And I think this is something, as we've moved from factories and then into cubicles, is that we've been able to be within our bodies less and less. We've kind of reduced our ability to engage with who we are as physical beings. And that has actually constricted our abilities to create and to think. When you move around, when you manipulate the world, you actually have different cognitive processes than when you're simply sitting there typing. And kindergartners get this, and that's part of how they learn about the world. And this is kind of one of those things that design thinking is kind of trying to bring back, is that ability to get up, move around, put stuff on walls, engage in new ways by just making our work more physical. I think you'll see a lot of benefits. And then, of course, what happens? You leave kindergarten, you move into grade school, you start sitting in rows, you start, facing forward, and, the logical progression back into the cube farm, right? And so this is something, kindergarten is like that last in time within institutions that we are free to be the people that we are. And slowly, over time, we start chipping that away as we turn into kind of these cogs within some larger societal system. And we're now seeing within business this desire to how do I get back in touch with those aspects of who I am. So I think what I believe, to succeed in the connected age, businesses need to embrace that which makes us human. We need to get back in touch with our whole selves. We need to engage with every aspect of what makes it interesting to be a person, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's social. I find it interesting that we're seeing this, part of this kind of sensing that I've been doing is seeing the rise of what are called natural user interfaces, right? With the Wiimote or direct manipulation on the iPad. On the left, you have a thing called Siftio blocks, which are these little computers that interact with each other. The Microsoft Kinect system that sold out immediately, right? There's a desire out there in the world to strip away the machines and those awkward interfaces and to be able to engage with them as people. And I find it curious that our technologists are doing more to help us embrace our humanity than our businesses are, right? Why are businesses lagging in a way that our technologies are not? And so, there we go. I want to call back on this slide, right? All those things on the right-hand side are really about kind of the things that we value as people, not that we value as machines. The stuff on the left is what machines value. The stuff on the right is what we as humans value and what we need to reconnect with in order to be able to succeed in this connected age. And I'm going to leave you with a story, and you're not going to be able to read this, or if you are, you have great vision. But I just wanted to leave you with this story that was very recent, so that's why it's kind of a late addition to the slides. 5 days ago, Jason Cockey had this post called Customer Service on Twitter, and he's talking about how his wife gets a lot of packages from Zappos, and so he tweeted like, "Hey Zappos, you seem to have this. I think my wife is having an affair with someone named Zappos. She gets a package from him every third day. I'm on to you, Mr. Zappos." And the Zappos Twitter account replied, "I'm sorry, sir, but our relationship with your wife is strictly professional. It's cool." And he compares this experience that he has with Zappos with an experience a friend of his, Mina Trott, has with United Airlines, where United canceled her flight. She sent these 3 very angry tweets about this experience, trying to deal with United Airlines, that United Airlines didn't acknowledge at all. No acknowledgement. And then later, on the next morning, she has this sarcastic tweet. "Thanks to United Airlines, I can finally watch that Frasier episode I missed in 1994, to which then United Airlines replies with a quote from the Frasier theme song, "I hear the blues calling tossed salad and scrambled eggs." And that tone deafness, right, demonstrates, kind of a lack of humanity, right? Zappos is an organization, supports its employees, is willing to engage with its customers, and knows how to behave as an organization and as individuals as an organization as a human. They had an honest, authentic human engagement. United Airlines, you can be sure, has a policies and procedures manual, as long as my arm, does not encourage play and honest authenticity within their organization, wasn't willing to acknowledge when a customer was upset, and then has this really tone-deaf reply when someone tweets something sarcastically, right? Like, as one of the kind of sub-themes of this event, I think is, and it's been true for the past few years, is how businesses are embracing social media. And if you're going to embrace social media, your business needs to be human, because if it's not, you're going to have these types of tone-deaf responses that people pick up on immediately. So with that, I leave with you this question: how can you make your organizations more human? How can you make them, hello? Oh, there we go. More respectful, social, sensorial, emotional, playful, creative, trusting, physical, interdependent. These are the qualities that we need to be re-embracing or embracing within our organizations, both internally and across with our customers. And with that, I thank you.